Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Pond. Please welcome the director of Son of Saul, Laszlo Nemes, and the star, Geza Rohrig.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
coming, and thank you for bringing an extraordinary film. You know, it's hard to just jump into a Q&A after they've just.
It's not ideal. I'm sorry, really.
But I mean, let's talk about where this came from. You're both Hungarian. I mean, what were you taught about the Holocaust growing up? What did you know about it? How was it treated?
Well, I'm from Hungary. I grew up in. I was a kid in the 80s. The idea of the fact that parts of my family was killed in the concentration camps was, transmitted to me from my parents very early on. Like I was 4 or 5. I was called a dirty Jew when I was 8 at school, So that's also, I think, contributed to my understanding of Hungarian attitude toward Jews. It was very visceral. It's always been very visceral with me. And for the first time I read the so-called Scrolls of Auschwitz, these writings by the members of the Sonderkommando, 10 years ago. And I had this feeling that I was projected into the middle of the extermination. I always imagined how it was for my great-grandfather just to be there and be taken to this building where he was murdered with other people from his hometown. So I really the fact that to be projected into the middle of it, how to communicate that in cinematic terms, that was my big question. It took me years to think about it and find a strategy to do it, to transmit something that I think, communicate something that I think never has been communicated in films, to all the films giving a sort of external point of view to the audience, and I wanted to present an internal point of view.
Geza, what was your experience? Were you taught about it? I mean, I understand you spent a lot of time at a certain point visiting Auschwitz.
Yeah, I did. I was 19 years old. Good evening, by the way. And I was a student, a university student in Poland, and since I promised to my grandfather, I went there and visited the place. But since you were asking about, how were we taught about the Holocaust in school, national pride, whatever nation do you belong to, it's like blood pressure. It's not healthy if it's too high. It's not healthy if it's too low. Thank you. And make no mistake, Hungarian history has very impressive chapters as well. For example, our last revolution, 1956, was a beautiful, beautiful time, something to be proud of. And we have, shameful chapters as well. And I think the one that stands out is obviously 1944, when in less than 2 months, Hungarian law enforcement, police, civil servants round up the Jews and deported them, 500,000 of them, to the camps, which is the single most fast and largest operation during the Holocaust. And that wasn't done by the Germans. And so, you know, the highlights, the good and the bad, of course, does not cancel each other out in Hungarian history. And we have to remember, at the same time, when I think of the Holocaust, it goes beyond the Hungarian context. It took place in the heart of the European civilization. It took place under the watch of church leaders. And, you know, in this way, this is really a question of much bigger than the narrow Hungarian prospect of it. How did Auschwitz come to being? And so this have been on my mind since I'm 12. That's when I first, you know, learned what happened. I think that's like in so many cases, families try to keep this secret from the children out of the urge of protecting them. I guess the idea is that what you don't know can't hurt you. But of course, it's a silly one, because the psychic reality of the parents and the grandparents in a million nonverbal ways is picked up by the children. And at one point, and yes, there is a right time, and yes, there is a right way, but at one point, it is better to know.
Well, Laszlo, you said it took a long time to figure out how to approach this. I mean, you had never made a feature film before. I mean, this is an enormous subject to set as your sights for your first feature. I mean, what does it take to think, not only am my first movie is going to be a movie about the Holocaust, and I'm going to find a new way to make a Holocaust movie?
I could have made 3 feature films instead of making this one, or while waiting to make this one. I chose not to. It was a semi-conscious decision. I wanted to, you know, a film, especially a first film, because of the lack of experience in a way, needs a lot of involvement and focus and investment in terms of time. So so I wanted to make it as, you know, to put as much effort into it as possible, and find and build a team to make it possible. So that's why I also wanted to make short films. I made 3 short films, and I started working with cinematographer, the sound designer, the production designer. So that was a slow way to build up the conditions to make this film.
Mm-hmm. What was the thinking behind, you know, the almost square aspect ratio, and behind basically spending most of the movie, you know, just right on Geza's face or the back of his head?
I wanted to make this portrait of a man during this very limited time, on a day and a half in hell, I really thought that if we narrow the field of vision, we would more rely on the viewer to have an intuition of what's going on, and of the infinity of the human suffering taking place. So instead of opening up and, you know, establishing and telling the audience everything and trying to, you know, jump around with point of views, I really wanted to. I said to myself, there's only one thing that you can represent with honesty. It's a human face, and this man has to become the guide, our guide. So we were thinking about using a widescreen aspect ratio at some time. It has a beautiful, you know, anamorphic 35. It would have been a great piece of cinema, but at the same time, it would have undermined our efforts to keep it narrow. It would have made the background too spectacular. We wanted to preserve it as in its narrowness and focus. So we after 2 years of reflection, we chose the 133 spherical lenses and 35 millimeter.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is a film about one face, and Geza, it's your face. I know you were a poet, you were a musician, you've been a teacher, but you really hadn't acted in a film before this?
I did some acting in my early 20s, but haven't been acting for a while, yeah.
I mean, it strikes me that this is usually we look at actors on screen to show emotion, and this is a guy who has to feel as little as possible. I mean, he can't show anything. I mean, how limiting is that, and what kind of challenge was that for you when you've got, the camera is on your face and it's a guy who's trying not to feel?
Right. Well, he's dead before dying. That's out of self-defense mechanism. He starts dying bit by bit. You can't afford to have empathy in such place. The moral choice vanishes, and everybody has a breaking point. When they arrived, they were right away on the ramp, so to speak, recruited, because the Nazis wisely assumed that these people were disoriented by the ordeal of just getting to the camp. It was a week or more in a cattle car with no water. So these people were frightened. And actually this morning, Laszlo and I and Michael Barker, the co-founder of Sony Pictures Classics, we met, could be the very last living former Sonderkommando member, who is 93 years old, a Greek Jew by the name of Dario Gabai. He might be the very last one, and we have a privileged, to meet him. And so these people were lured into a deadly trap. They didn't have a genuine choice over the matter. And me as an actor, my challenge was how to bridge this gap of the reality of my own life in 2014, at the time we were shooting, and go back 70 years in such an, unspeakable situation that is beyond any of the vocabulary of human places I've never been. I mean, it's one thing to visit a camp, and it's another thing to be there. And and so I did a lot of reading, and I understood that it is going to be my face that will be the measure of all things in this movie. And these people were traumatized. They were in this comatose, robotic, ghost-like state of mind. And the challenge for me was too adequate. At the same time, I couldn't be boring, because it's a 107 minutes movie, and if I'm bored, then the viewer will be bored. So I had to kind of, compensate the slowness, the monotony of my face with some sort of an intensity, persistence.
Well, I don't think it's conscious. I think it's he has in his body and his psyche everything that's already, in a way, about the story of the Holocaust. It just he didn't have to act. I don't think he had to compensate. I think it was felt, and we wanted to tone. I wanted everybody to not to project their present set of emotions onto their parts, and find a different frequency of emotions. It's not the usual,
Mm-hmm.
the emotions these emotions come after the war. So we had to find a sort of logic that's really the here and now of the extermination.
So how did you prepare? I mean, I assume that you read the Sonderkommando journals. Did you speak to people, survivors of the camps, or?
A survivor is not a Sonderkommando member.
Yeah.
This is really two the different thing. But I think you're right, Stephen. As they say, in real estate, they say location, location, location. When it comes to movie making, it's preparation, 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 because it's a very expensive business. It was shot on 35 millimeters. We had a number of days to get the job done. So obviously, you had to utilize and the very best you could the weeks and months that we had. I had. So the prime resource I had was in fact literature. I did my very best on whatever way or language I could to learn the most precise way. What were they doing? And just as Laszlo said, I wasn't interested in their thoughts or feelings, because I don't think at the time there was a lot of self-reflection going on. It was just the here and now, just the minute by minute. Do the best to survive. So I wanted to know, how was it when they opened the door and then they hosed the blood and the soil of the bodies? I wanted to know, how were they separating these intertwined bodies? How did they deal with the teeth? Did they use mirror? Did they use pliers? How did they cut the hair? When? Where? All these things, I wanted to really map it out for myself, these 12 hours shifts that they were doing, the day shift, night shift. It was very physical, very manual. And of course, it resulted in this mental state. And I'm not trying to tell you that it was a monolithic, response. Obviously, even there is each individual, did it differently. So that was the real thing, to understand the system, which was how can the most amount of Jews being killed with the least amount of Germans being involved, and that for me as a person, as a believer, to face this sort of radical, pure evil being manifested, and this sort of division of labor that basically leaves the dirty work of the Holocaust to the victims, and by doing that deprives them even from the solace of being innocent. So that whole thing came with a lot of nightmares, insomnia, you name it, even though I decided and I had resolutions not to read stuff before going to bed, but I couldn't resist. So I was actually really, and so was my wife, waiting for the shooting, because it just accumulated. And people think, how horrible was the shooting? No, the shooting was the best thing. The hard part was before that and after that. The 28 days of shooting was actually great, because I had lines, I had makeup, I had a costume, I had a set, and these things all helped.
Laszlo, did it weigh on you like that during the process?
Yeah, I think I spent 10 years in the crematorium, so it leaves some traces. But at the beginning, I was sure I would not be able to finish it. The first day of the shoot, I thought it's never gonna. I will not be able. I'm not tough enough to do that. But you get used to everything. it's this movie is also about that. I guess it's you can get used to everything, and this was very hard, and yeah, it just after a while, and I had this feeling throughout the shooting that I'm failing. There's this film. We had this feeling of making a prototype. This is we didn't have coverage, things like that. That was more or less cut in the camera. My editor was on set. So we were dancing on the edge of the abyss, and I had the feeling that this is not going to end well. This is not going to end well.
So did you have to do a lot of rehearsal and a lot of blocking to figure out those?
Well, that's the other thing. We didn't have much time. We had time to prepare, and I think that was key. So we had time to prepare everything, main action, background, movement. Everything was planned, and in a very, very nice way. But it just once you get there, and especially for a first-time director, I guess it's scary. It's scary to how. So now we really have to make it happen, but am I able to do it? And that was a real question. And what did I want to say? What was your question?
What was my question? I don't know.
I'm sorry. I'm a little confused. It's just that the preparation, and then once we were there, we had so little time. So little time. The frenzy of this shooting, I think, was connected to the frenzy that was depicted. We didn't. I wish we had more time to do this film, but it just was too. We didn't have time for anything, so preparation helped at least to do it, and it was key. But then it was still complicated to block everything, especially for these very complicated shots. We have 3-4 minute shots, and with a lot of background and foreground action. We actually put the background first in place, and then the main action into it, because the rules of the framework, the rules of the camp, had to be defining the possibilities of the main character.
So at what point did you feel like, okay, I actually can do this, we have something here?
I'm not sure about that. Even the sound post-production, took us 5 months to do the post-production in sound. It was like unbearably long, and I was there every day, and it the more we added human voices, the more we had to put more human voices in 8 languages. It was very intense, and getting all these ADR sessions, and I was depressed throughout post-production, I think, even more than throughout the shooting. So I guess this is how this movie has been made,
Right. And then you went to Cannes, and suddenly you were a hit, and Michael Barker stepped in, and
then it became a fairy tale. No, it's. I think being frustrated is part of the process, and especially for this film, it's part of the process. How do you live up to the, how are you in this, at the right frequency to communicate this kind of thing? Are you honest throughout the film? This again, it's very demanding, it's very personal. But Cannes obviously was a great adventure, and it was an incredible start for the film. And the fact that suddenly, we started very low key. It was competition, but it was one of the first days. It was afternoon projection, nobody, nobody knew anything about this film, and what the first film from Hungary.
Right, you were
About
supposed to
the
be in an
Holocaust?
uncertain
Are you
regard or
kidding me?
something.
Sorry?
You were supposed to be in an uncertain regard. You weren't supposed to be in the main competition with your first film.
Well, it's very rare, and then they really wanted us in competition, and suddenly everybody started talking about this film. So yeah, it's just the contrast. Nobody wanted to make this film. Everybody was running away from us. In Europe, they really didn't answer our calls, and everybody was. I tried in France, for a very long period of time, to have producers, co-producers. It just didn't work, and the resistance of the system was tremendous. You have ambition as a filmmaker. Why are you ambitious, by the way? Why do you want to make a film that's different? Why is it about the Holocaust? We had so many films about the Holocaust. Why do you want to add another one to the list? Precisely for that reason, because you've had enough of it. And so I just no, but I don't want to seem like make a myth out of myself. It's just that it really says something about how much resistance there is in the system to make a film that's not like the other ones, but this is about filmmaking. Filmmaking should be about having new voices and new approaches. If we don't push the form and the approaches to the different zones, what will happen to filmmaking? It becomes intercutable material. That's the journey of the
Right. Well, before I take questions from the audience, guys, let me just ask you something that I've asked you before, but why now should we still be telling these stories?
I think it's an impossible case to make that history turned the page. The alarming frequency of instances of genocide since the Holocaust. You got every third Cambodian murdered. There is Bosnia, there is Rwanda, there is Darfur. And you might be surprised by it, but guess what? The most dangerous thing right now to be is a Christian in the Middle East. As we speak, they are not refugees. They are being lined up and beheaded. So there's a lot going on in the world. And you don't have to just consult your daily newspaper, and you'll see that we hadn't learned that much. It's a permanent possibility. The world leaders come to the mic, they condemn it, but they are utterly incapable to prevent it. So the big questions, this is not a parochial issue. This is not really the Holocaust. We're not talking about we're not whining here as Jews. We are part of the human family. And what we are asking is that how can, given and admitting that science and technology made this life longer and more comfortable and faster than ever, how can the world become a better place if the people who are living in it are not becoming better people? And so, I think there's these are just big questions, and we are 15 years into the 21st century. It does not look too promising.
Right. Well, I think we have time for a couple questions from the audience. Yeah, right here.
What's the reaction in Hungary?
There's a little double talk in Hungary, I guess. From government circles, there is, to the world, there is, all the rhetorics, so to speak. And then, at the same time, there is whitewashing and amnesia and all that sort of thing. Basically, the blaming goes to two directions. One is, of course, the Germans did it, while again the military presence of the Nazis were minimal in Hungary. And it could have not been done without the requested and received assistance, from the Hungarians. And the other one is what I call the hoodlum theory. They try to kind of blame the outcast, the aristocrats, the people that, like the mobs or whatever. But that's not going to cut it either. There is a real responsibility here. But again, I don't think we should really locate the issue in Hungary. If you're asking me, this is the greatest failure of Christianity since its very origins. I think the abandonment of the Jews in such ways. If the church leaders of Europe would have come together and in 1938, right after the Kristallnacht, would have spoken up and they said, wait a second, we are Jews as well in spirit. We are not. This is not something we can live in peace with. Then the plan would have collapsed, for sure. So it did not start with Hitler, and these are the bigger questions. I think we have to face that, and there's a lot of little points that I can. It's like meaning great things. My favorite is Pope John the 23rd. There's he was excellent. He really understood the whole thing, and it's a pity that he was followed by Pope Paul VI. And it's a lot of politics, and I think that is one of the things that we have to understand, that this is not, again, I don't try to act or say that this is there are us and them. This is not what I try to say. With the rationalism of the Enlightenment, somehow we cut ourselves off from the divine, from the transcendence, and all the church I know, Jews as well, somehow became political bodies, and they don't really represent moral authority. People don't look up to their rabbis, people don't look up to their priests. And it didn't start in the 20th century. Religion was out of fashion in the 19th century already. So this is a big, big question I think we all have to wrestle with, and I'm not going to even bring up the issue, of course, the responsibility of the Creator, for God's sake, right? He could have intervened and should have intervened much better, much earlier. So, if you think about the Holocaust, you think about everything.
Well, I'm afraid I think you guys have to be elsewhere, so I'll just say thank you very much for coming and for an extraordinary film.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.